will leave a few minutes at the end to answer questions from our listeners. So now I'll hand it over to Lori Pfingst, who will give an overall framing of the final budget this session.
Thank you, Precious, and thank you everyone who has joined the call. So I'm going to just start with our initial take on the budget and talk a little bit about where the budget process started and where we ended up, and then we'll go into some greater detail on the good, the bad, and the missed opportunities that Precious mentioned. So the House was the first to release their budget earlier in legislative session. That budget made a pretty considerable effort to try to bolster investments across all of the areas that we care about, health, education, environmental investments. And so, it was for a supplemental budget, it was a good, I think, first step to try to make up some ground that we've lost in past years. When the Senate came after, it weakened many of those investments in the budget, and so it set the stage for a compromise budget. That compromise budget, as Precious mentioned, came out on March 29th. And overall, I would say from the Budget and Policy Center perspective, as well as the perspective of many of the partners that we work with, we were disappointed as many of the investments that we feel we should be making to create a strong economy just simply were not able to be made. We're at the point where the legislature is investing in emergency situations that are reaching crisis levels, like mental health and homelessness. I mean, even in the news this week, a lot of talk around the mental health system with Western State Hospital. So we're at the point where we're investing in emergencies and we're not able to make the proactive investments we need to make to create a strong economy. And not only that, we're shifting funds out of other important accounts to just maintain what we've promised to do. We shifted funds out of the Public Works account in this budget, which is really meant to go to building infrastructure in communities. We've shifted money out of the Model Toxics Control account, which is meant to clean up toxic waste across the state. And we're using those funds to kind of backfill other programs that should be funded with state dollars. We also used resources from the Rainy Day Fund, which is really only meant to be used in economic downturns. It is the state kind of, budget. It's called the Budget Stabilization Account. It's meant to be used when our budget is in a serious crisis. We had to pull from that. And we did all that rather than raising revenue to make the investments that we should be making. All of this is going to come to a head next year as they plan for the 2017-2019 biennial budget, next legislative session. And so we'll go into a little more detail on all of these things and give you an overview of our take on the budget. And to do that, I'm going to turn it over to Elena.
All right, thank you. So first, I want to highlight some of the good things and the missed opportunities around racial equity that we see in the state budget. The first noteworthy policy that we want to highlight is the inclusion of a study to implement racial equity impact statements in state legislation. And as you may recall, there are two bills moving through the legislature this session that we're seeking to implement racial impact statement tools. It was Senate Bill 5752, which was sponsored by Senator Hasagawa, and House Bill 2076, which was sponsored by Representative Sawyer. And while this study that was included in the budget doesn't go as far as these bills, it is an important step towards incorporating racial impact statements in the crafting of new legislation. And we know that these statements help lawmakers understand the real impacts of their proposed policies by highlighting how they either promote opportunity by advancing racial equity or reinforce barriers by perpetuating institutional racism. We all want to build a better future for our families and our state, but in order to fulfill that promise, we have to change the way that we do our work. And these racial equity impact statements are a really important tool in the larger efforts to ensure that all members of our community have access to the building blocks of a strong economy. In terms of missed opportunities, there's just one policy that we want to highlight, but I do encourage you to reach out to members of the racial equity team if you want to find out about more hits and misses that reflect policies that promote and advance racial equity in Washington State. The Racial Equity Team is a group of people of color-led organization and network of lobbyists, community leaders, and activists that are dedicated to advancing racial equity in state policy. So one issue area that we wanted to be sure to highlight was the Voting Rights Act, which once again did not pass this session. It's House Bill 1745 and Senate Bill 5668. The Voting Rights Act would have empowered communities to elect representatives that are responsive to their needs and reflective of their communities. This local Voting Rights Act would create geographic districts to help neighborhoods more easily run candidates and participate in electoral processes, acknowledging that our at-large election systems often drown out the needs of people of color living in majority white districts. So next I want to talk a little bit about some of the investments in education. So there was some good things that we see coming out of the budget this session, starting with $1.2 million to increase investments aimed at closing the opportunity gap in education, and $13 million to improve availability of quality family child care centers. So through the passage of House Bill 1541, lawmakers instituted several recommendations from the Educational Opportunity Gap Oversight Accountability Committee, including reducing disparities in school discipline for students of color, instituting mandatory cultural competency training for teachers and staff, and requiring more detailed race and ethnic data gathering for students. Lawmakers also funded a 2015 collective bargaining agreement for family child care providers, which will help to increase the number of slots available and improve affordability for family child care. There were some missed opportunities that we want to highlight as well. For one, there were no major investments to adequately fund K-12 education per the McCleary ruling, and lawmakers supplanted state money for Early Start with federal dollars and made no major progress with equitable implementation of the Early Start Act. For starters, lawmakers did not increase compensation for providers at child care centers to be on par with the family child care providers, nor did they take steps to eliminate the wait list for Working Connections child care subsidies. Working Connections child care is our state's largest child care subsidy program, and we're poised to hit the cap for the program this summer. And again, lawmakers put the task of fully funding basic education off until next session. In terms of economic security, not much good happened this session. So the bad, we saw a $49 million reduction in state funding for temporary assistance for needy families. Once again, lawmakers swept resources from TANF to help balance the state budget, something that's becoming an unfortunate trend. Previous cuts to TANF, the primary program for helping families with low incomes find or keep a job, have kicked people off the program and made it harder to get on, resulting in caseload declines. So this results in supposed savings in the program, which lawmakers have repeatedly funneled away from TANF rather than reinvesting in the program. There were several missed opportunities this session as well, including a bill that would have created a commission focused on reducing intergenerational poverty and additional education for training opportunities for parents with low incomes. House Bill 2518 would have been a bold step towards improving family economic security in our state. The bill would have directed state agencies across sectors to create a data system to track intergenerational poverty. It would have created a state commission to summarize the data in an annual report, and a community advisory committee to provide input on data and the creation of a long-term plan to improve intergenerational family economic security. Lawmakers also had the opportunity to increase training programs for parents with low incomes on TANF by increasing vocational training from 12 months to 24 months. And they also failed to fully restore the TANF cash grant, which was cut by 15% during the recession and was increased by 9% last session.
So the highlights that Elena showcased are a lot of the investments that were made were done with those shifting of funds that I mentioned earlier. So it's kind of like we're playing this big shell game with the budget. Really, if you look at the budget that was enacted last session, it was only $190 million net increase from the enacted budget. And that money came from the rainy day fund, and that was to cover the wildfire season that was especially bad in 2015. So, it's good that the legislature recognized that we should be putting money toward wildfires. I mean, obviously, it is an enormous need that our state has. The bad news is that that money is covering last year's fires. And we expect as climate change will continue to have an impact on our region, that things like wildfires and dealing with the effects of drought are going to continue to have an impact on our state. And the missed opportunity is that we're not adequately planning for the impact of climate change on our region. So we continue to play a game of catch-up. Probably the investments that got the most recognition this session were for mental health and youth homelessness. They were the winners in this year's state budget. There was $41 million put toward mental health. Mainly that was to support Western State Hospital and expand mental health care providers and services across the state. There was also $11 million for put toward homeless youth, which is going to create 23 new HOPE beds, which are, they provide temporary shelter support and permanency planning for street youth. And some of that $11 million are also going to include temporary services for homeless youth, mainly that is going to flow to counties. So while that was good news, that mental health and homelessness received some kind of investment. Our partners that work in these areas, these two issues have gotten a tremendous amount of press across the state. They have truly reached crisis levels, and the budget compromise really missed an opportunity to invest in the infrastructure we need to move the needle on these crises. Again, just another example of how our budget is only dealing with emergency situations and not making the investments that, had we been making them all along, would have prevented these emergencies in the first place. So, with all that in mind, as I said at the beginning, we're disappointed in the most recent budget. Our state should be doing much more. The budget should be used to proactively make investments that everyone in our state needs to succeed, and that lays the foundation for a thriving community and a strong economy and supports the people of Washington State. We've said this before. It will not be a surprise that we cannot do this without revenue reform. So looking to next session and what's happening as we move into our interim planning and start planning for 2017. It's a big ballot year, big election year. There'll be a minimum wage initiative on the ballot. There will probably be a carbon bill that is on the ballot. Tim Eyman is likely going to have an initiative on the ballot, so huge ballot initiative season. Lots of big elections happening that might shift power within the legislature. The McCleary deadline is 2018. The legislature will have to have a plan to cover McCleary for the 2017-2019 biennial budget that will be decided on next session. Next session will be very, very decisive and likely very contentious, we're expecting. In preparation for that, Budget and Policy Center is right now working on a really exciting campaign to build support for comprehensive revenue reform. We are going to announce that campaign very soon. Should be in the next couple weeks, I believe, so please stay tuned. There's lots of exciting work going on around the state. I think that we're seeing a real shift among our partners and with our various people in all the areas that we work on, including from legislators, on really a big appetite for doing something that not only is going to meet McCleary, but is going to be able to make all the investments that the state needs to build the economy that we need. So with that high-level overview, I'm going to turn it back to Precious.
Thank you, Lori. As we don't have any questions and that this is our last budget beat, we are going to sign off for now. I just want to give a huge thanks to Lori Pfingst and Elena Hernandez for participating and giving us this overview. You can always visit our website, budgetandpolicy.org, and you will receive details on the comprehensive revenue strategy in the near future, and to view a YouTube recording of this budget beat call. We do have one question, and hopefully one of you guys can answer this. We have a question about higher education. Can any of you speak to higher education?
There was some money put forth for the state need grant, and to expand opportunity for low-income students to attend higher education. It was a relatively modest amount of money, and we're still trying to figure out, there's a little bit of an interaction with how the state need grant is interacting with a college-bound program, and it's one of those budget things. It feels like there's a little trickery going on, we are happy to follow up with you. Please send Elena or I an email, and we can dig a little deeper to get an answer to that question. But there wasn't really a lot of significant progress on higher ed in this year's budget.
Thanks, Lori. So we'll sign off for now. Thanks everyone again for participating, and have a wonderful weekend.